live streaming. And we're not. And we are here and live. All right. So, Alexander, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm a filmmaker, kind of a cryptozoology researcher, enthusiast, adventurer. That's a big part of it, is getting out there and really exploring and checking out some of these areas to their full potential. I do a lot of films and videos, mostly with a production company called Small Town Monsters. We sort of specialize in strange folklore, a lot of small communities and rural communities across the United States, but other places as well. We've done stuff in Canada too. So we have a pretty broad focus. And I mostly do a lot of Bigfoot investigations and films about the Bigfoot topic, but I've done plenty of other stuff as well. Some UFOs, lake monsters, anything kind of generally unknown is stuff that I'm into. So, right up your alley as well.
Absolutely. So what was your gateway into this whole thing? Like what was your first, oh my God, I love Bigfoot, or, lake monsters, or whatever it was?
Yeah. So I was a kid in the 90s. So there was a lot of, interesting stuff going on then. You had the X-Files, was a big popular show at the time. But my gateway was probably my dad telling me the story of the Yeti, something about that tail, the Himalayas, and going up into the mountains and seeing the kind of terrain. It just really spoke to me, and I thought, well, it's interesting. There might be something to it. So I started reading a lot of stuff on those topics, and inevitably, once you read, you go to the local library or your school library, and you pick out a book about mysterious creatures. It's going to have Bigfoot chapters, but it's also going to have Nessie, Chupacabra, all sorts of other cryptids and creatures. So you get exposed to all that and say, okay, I find that one kind of cool. Oh, that one I don't really care for, but this one's interesting. So that's the kind of how I got into it. Started watching a lot of documentaries. Like I said, X-Files was big at the time. A show called Animal X when I was a little bit older. Monster Quest was big on TV. And that's kind of what really got me into it. And I didn't start really doing it myself until later on. I had a waning kind of interest when I was in college and that sort of time period, but priorities are so different then. You've got so much other things going on in life that I wasn't as concerned. But then, one point after college, I just that was when Finding Bigfoot was really popular. I was starting to get more interested in the topic of Bigfoot again. And I started saying, well, man, I studied communications, and I was doing a lot of video work and film work as it was. And I thought, man, I love the documentary medium. Like, that's my favorite medium, I should say. I said, hey, why don't I just do my own little kind of short documentaries? That was when YouTube was really starting to take off. So it was very easy to just post stuff and kind of see where it went. So that's where I started doing little shorter documentaries on the cryptid topic. And I kind of led into one thing, into another thing. And almost a decade later, here I am, doing all this awesome stuff and had the awesome opportunities I've had with Small Town Monsters and, elsewhere. It's been a fun ride.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see a little bit of research on you, and you went to college in Connecticut.
I did, yes.
So where did you grow up? What brought you to Connecticut?
I grew up in New Hampshire. So
okay, I didn't realize if you grew up there.
It was pretty close, yeah. School Quinnipiac, they had a pretty good communications program that I was interested in, so that's what kind of drew me there. Looking back on it, Connecticut, probably not the best place. I mean, the food there is amazing, but nature-wise, I love mountains and wilderness areas. Spend a lot of time in those places now, like here in New Hampshire and elsewhere. So Connecticut wasn't the best for that, but
no.
It was only for 4 years. So
but not bad. Not bad by Quinnipiac. You got Sleeping Giant right there.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. The food, like I said, the food's amazing. I mean, New Haven style pizza.
So I'm from Connecticut. Okay. I grew up there. Well, I shouldn't say grew up. From 13 to 18, I lived there.
Right. But so you had some pretty important years there.
And my whole family was from there. So yes, and we lived in New Haven, which is right by Quinnipiac. So
I know, yeah. I was actually just in Stratford, Connecticut this past
weekend.
There was a Two Roads Brewery. They had this kind of cryptid event. I went and did a little talk about some of my adventures, and of course, I had to make sure I went to my favorite sandwich spot in Hamden, Connecticut, and then I also got some New Haven pizza on the way back, because New Haven pizza is probably the best in the world. I mean,
It's pretty damn good.
it's very good. You know, my pizza ranking is like New Haven pizza. New
Mhm.
York, New Jersey is right kind of under there.
Yeah.
And I even prefer that kind of New Haven style over some of the pizzas I've tried in like Italy and Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't do them as well done over there. The
You're
New
like
Haven
Dave
style is like
Portnoy.
I've watched a few of his videos. It's funny. I have his app, and I'll check when I'm in an area
Yeah.
like what's the best pizza place around. He's got a pretty good app, but yeah. So Connecticut, you know, there's some weird stories in Connecticut. There's like Dudleytown. There's some strange
Mhm.
abandoned places. There's ghost stories. There's a few Bigfoot stories. You know, I knew a few people that were into the Bigfoot stuff in Connecticut,
Yeah.
but most of the Bigfoot stories seem to come from like the northeast part of Connecticut, so over by Rhode Island and
Hmm.
Massachusetts. You know, the Mohegan Sun, that whole strip, it's got a lot of woods. And then the
Yeah,
other
we were
side
just in
was,
Mystic
yeah, so not
two
far from
weekends
Mystic.
ago. Yeah.
But
And
the
I
other
did
side of
some
the
stop
state,
offs there. It was pretty awesome.
the northwest side of the state's the other side that has a lot of Bigfoot stories because that's where the Appalachian Trail runs through. You've got the Appalachian Trail, you know, kind of that border with Massachusetts and New York. So, but yeah, ultimately Connecticut's a very urban and kind of suburban state. There's not a lot of space. It's a very populated state. So there's not a lot going on in terms of some of that kind of stuff that I guess I'm more interested in Connecticut.
Yeah. So how did you get into film? Like what made that your choice of medium?
I was always just kind of into the documentary scene, especially. That's sort of, I'd done plenty of documentaries even in my free time, before. And, I started working in video production and, I did various stuff with some productions, some Hollywood productions that would do stuff locally in the New England area. I worked as like a production assistant, locations manager. I did some stuff for like Hallmark movies, even a couple movies like Gus Van Sant did a movie out here,
Yeah.
and I got to work for Matthew McConaughey's stunt double, which is really interesting. So I was doing that, and I was kind of like, that's not really what I want to do. So after I got out of school, I kind of went into like the advertising space in the Boston area. That was not rewarding at all. It
No.
was like, it pays the bills and it is what it is, but you're kind of on that grind. Whereas on the
Yeah.
side, I was
That
still doing,
corporate side.
yeah, yeah. And I wasn't doing anything too crazy, and I worked for like 5, 6 years. I was commuting back and forth from southern New Hampshire to Boston, which is just pretty grueling, that commute, because Boston has really bad traffic. But I was always doing stuff on the side, my own documentaries. Like I did one, I traveled to Loch Ness in 2015, and I did a little documentary on that. And then I started doing these short Bigfoot interviews, and I started a YouTube channel called Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, just to post these. Sometimes they were just almost unedited interviews, very minimally edited, maybe with just some music and some B-roll of like Bigfoot eyewitnesses. I wanted to originally do a feature film about Sasquatch, and I realized I had so much material I'd filmed. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do episodic stuff, and that's when I started doing that on YouTube. And at some point, like 2016 or so, Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters reached out and said, "Hey, I really like your Loch Ness film. I'd like to show it at an event I'm doing in Ohio." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, somebody wants to show this POS," So I'm like, "Oh man, I'm surprised somebody actually likes this," because I can't even watch that thing now. It's over a decade old. How as an artist, it's hard to critique your own materials, but
Yeah.
it could be painful to watch. So, he wanted to show that, and then we started kind of communicating then, and I ended up doing a series, actually, a poster behind me, the On the Trail of Champ, which was about the Lake Champlain monster. I did that in 2017, came out in 2018. And, in the meantime, I was doing my own films on the side, and then I was working on Small Town Monsters productions as well. I got on crew, and we'd work films like Momo, the Missouri Monster, a lot of the other stuff that STM has traditionally filmed over the years, kind of the feature films. And then at some point, like after COVID, it was, I think, 2021, we started talking about doing more YouTube stuff, a little more. It's a little more loose, I guess. Production's a little bit easier. You could do. I really wanted to do a series that was sort of like following me on my investigations that I was doing anyway, Bigfoot related stuff. And we kind of came up with the idea to do a series called Beyond the Trail, which was following, just like I said, me on my adventures looking for Bigfoot. Pretty easy, pretty open-ended kind of concept, nothing too crazy. And I started doing that, and we started growing on the YouTube channel, and People seem to like it. I was really inspired by like the style of Survivor Man, Les Stroud,
Yeah, right.
filming yourself out in the woods, like you're doing it yourself. You don't have a whole crew with you. It's a very bare bones kind of thing, and it's honest. That's what I thought at the time. There's not a lot of stuff taking the topic seriously. There's a lot of just cheesy stuff on TV, and I don't know, it just wasn't like. And I love finding Bigfoot. Don't get me wrong, and I love all the characters in it. And I know Cliff and Bobo very well personally. They're great guys, and but they'll be very open and tell you like when you're working on TV, you're only so limited with what you can do, right?
Highly produced, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they, to their credit on that show, they when the producers try to pull fake stuff on them, they all threatened to mutiny, and those guys have been pretty open about that. So I respect them for that. But as Cliff always says, it kind of gave them an opportunity to go and travel and go to some of these bucket list locations, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But it inspired a lot of people too. But again, at the time, like there just wasn't a lot, even like 2020. Since then, there hasn't been a lot of this stuff. At that time that was going on. So I thought, hey, let's just do this and see how it goes. And it seemed to take off. And now, 5 years later, it's a very different scene. There's a ton of YouTube channels and a ton of people doing very similar sort of investigative films and documentaries, which is great. I love to see the interest is definitely growing. But yeah, that's sort of the genesis of how it kind of all began. And at Small Town Monsters, we do not only kind of long form films. That's a lot of stuff that we do a Kickstarter every year. That's what our Kickstarter backers get access to. And that's the stuff that goes to DVD and to streaming platforms. Whereas the YouTube stuff, it's much more episodic. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say less produced, because we work our butts off for every production, but it's a little bit more
you can
lenient.
see the quality is still there. It's not there's no difference in quality. It's just,
that's what we try to do, is we try to have maximum quality with everything. But again, it's a little bit more, when I'm out, like we recently released a video for the Beyond the Trail series, and it's about my investigation in West Virginia with my buddies. And we were out exploring for a few days and, trying to record any interesting activity we get. So that kind of thing, it's a little less polished than say an interview or an interview-based documentary that's talking about the history of Bigfoot in British Columbia, where you've got like 10 different sit-down interviews and people are telling stories. So it's a little bit different. So, but we have so many different series and things that we do at Small Town Monsters. I do 3 YouTube series myself. I've got Beyond the Trail, which again is much more like if you like the boots on the ground investigative stuff, if you like seeing gear out in the field, camp cooking, beautiful scenery, just exploration, stories, trying to get possible evidence, that's more of a series for you. Then I also do the Appalachian Bigfoot Files, which is kind of an examination of Bigfoot stories in the Appalachian Mountains from Maine to Georgia. And every episode focuses on a different area. Like we just put one out a few weeks ago that was about Western Massachusetts, and my friend Jonathan Wilk, who had an incredible encounter in the early 90s while he was a park ranger at a state forest out there along the Appalachian Trail. So every episode focuses on a different part of Bigfoot history, whether it's upstate New York or Georgia or North Carolina, West Virginia. And then my series Strange Places is about, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's about weird places, weird history. That can include places like the land between the lakes, or I'm working on a Pine Barrens episode. We just filmed that recently where we were in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, where you've got the Jersey Devil story, of course. You've got Bigfoot stories down there. You've got UFOs and all sorts of stuff. So each series that I do has a different sort of flavor and a different way it looks at things. And that's what I love about, kind of the freedom, the creative freedom to do this sort of stuff. So
keeps you busy though.
It definitely does. Yeah, I have like a rotation of stuff that I'm editing. I'll finish one project and it's a totally different vibe when you're editing that. Like, Beyond the Trail is a little more upbeat. The music is more adventurous. Scenery, it's like a, very enthusiastic. And then I switch over to like a Strange Places type thing where the music's usually very dramatic, very slow, creepy. Like the vibes are very different. So I've got to take myself out of the mentality from editing one and swap into another. And, it's a different style too. I'll use different fonts and different, just the look. I try to get a creepier, grittier kind of look. So, next video, I got to go back to a more upbeat style. So it's kind of definitely keeps you on your toes. But a lot of times I'm filming these at the same time. So I'll be filming, we're filming a Beyond the Trail, and then I'm also doing an interview in camp with a researcher that's going to be part of the Appalachian Bigfoot Files. So, it kind of, they work in tandem. It's been kind of a process to get to that point, but somehow it all kind of works in the chaos, I guess.
Right. What's your favorite place that you've like done a documentary about?
That is a
Maybe
tough,
not
tough
place. I
one.
mean, maybe
Yeah,
also like event, or whatever.
it's a real tough one
I'm sure.
because
You
I've been
can
to
give
so
me a
many
few.
places. Yeah, yeah, it's gonna have to be. It'll have to be a little list, but I mean, definitely one of my top locations. I'll give one. I'll give a couple from kind of different regions, but first of all, every place I've been to is amazing. I'm lucky to be able to travel to some of these places. West Virginia, one of my favorite states. Been there multiple times. Just beautiful terrain. Up here in the Northeast, I'm biased, but the swamps in Florida, they might seem like a gross place to be, but get the chance to go explore out there and you find a Florida panther track in the dirt. I mean, it's such a cool
Yeah,
thing.
that's
So I'm
pretty
so
cool.
lucky. But one of the top places is definitely Alaska. That is one that
Hmm.
I've had the chance to go back a few times now. I spent a month and a half, traveling to and from Alaska and being in Alaska for a month a couple of years ago, where I filmed a bunch of different films, and that was just what an experience. But there's this location we call Area A, which is on the Kenai Peninsula of Alaska, and that's where a friend of mine has built a remote cabin out there that's only
Mm.
accessible by boat or plane. And we've done, the Alaskan coastal Sasquatch parts 1 and 2 there. We filmed that in 2022, and I spent 2 weeks out there in 2023. And it's a place I think about almost daily. It's this temperate rainforest. It's beautiful, creepy, eerie kind of environment with the rain and the fog and these giant mountains that just roll right out of the sea, where you've got bears, you've got brown bears, black bears, moose, Sitka black-tailed deer, orcas, humpback whales in the water, seals, sea lions, otters. I mean, it is like an incredible location. Just some of the best visual I think I've ever captured of just any sort of nature out there. You just throw your drone up or get a camera shot, and it's what a rugged place. So that's one of my top. I think about it all the time. That particular place, and then Bluff Creek in Northern California.
Oh yeah,
Definitely, it's the birthplace
iconic
of,
place, right?
yeah, of course, birthplace of Bigfoot, Patterson Gimlin film. I've been out there twice doing various productions, and I did we've done the typical kind of Bigfoot documentaries while out there. And one of our first ever Beyond the Trail episodes was about Bluff Creek, and I heard this really interesting whoop out there after this weird incident where my friend's dog was super terrified of something that was moving around, and it was a whole weird event. But this past summer, I was up there at Bluff Creek, and I got to do a documentary for Strange Places, which is about the abandoned Gasky Orleans Road, which is
Oh
this
yeah, yeah.
highway. It's this highway that goes out, and one side of it is at Bluff Creek. You actually drive the highway to get into Bluff Creek in the Patterson film site. You're like, why am I on a paved road in the middle of this desolate wilderness? Well, it was actually supposed to be a highway that linked the coastal region of Northern California to the interior, and they completed all but 6 miles of it because the valley it goes through is sacred for the natives, and they got it shut down. So you drive this highway, and all of a sudden it just comes to basically a dead end in the middle of like the most beautiful wilderness you can imagine. And there's so many Bigfoot stories right on that road itself. So that was amazing to do a documentary on that. And then one of my other top locations that I got to visit last year and did a film on was for Strange Places as well, and that was the an abandoned radar base up in northern Vermont, not far from the Canadian border. It was called the Lyndonville Air Force or the North Concord Air Force Radar Station. It changed names, but it was part of the kind of Cold War early detection systems they had in the
Yeah,
1950s.
yeah, yeah.
The threat of the Soviet Union, so they had them in the very high locations, and it's been abandoned now since about 1963, so it's in pretty bad shape. But it's on top of basically a 4,000-foot mountain almost in northern Vermont, and it has this 360 view into the mountains in New Hampshire and Vermont and Canada. But what's so interesting about it, and the reason why I did a Strange Places episode on it, is that this base, there's a couple Project Blue Book reports about the base. Project Blue Book being the kind of one of the systematic government examinations of the UFO and kind of what we call UAP topic now, but this was in the 60s in that sort of time period during the Cold War. And there's a couple reports from this base, and one of them, which I find to be the most interesting one, was from September of 1961. And it happened to be that this radar facility tracked what they called a UFO for 15 to 19 minutes on radar with very erratic patterns. And they likened Project Blue Book likened it to a weather balloon, right? That's what they called this craft. But
Right.
it happened to occur the same night that Betty and Barney Hill claimed to have been abducted in neighboring New Hampshire. And sequentially, the radar base tracked this UFO a few hours before Betty and Barney Hill drove through Franconia Notch, which is when their encounter began. Same night, I believe September 19th, 1961, but you might have to correct me because I'm not great with dates, but I think it was 19th. I know for a fact they both happened the same night, that the way they were reported. So, and it's actually about like 30 something air miles from the radar base to Franconia Notch. Like I've stood on the towers at the radar base and you can see with the naked eye the mountains right where they drove through, where they said they started seeing the craft. So what are the chances that of all the times this base was operating for almost a decade, they've only had a handful of incidents, and the most prolific one happened the same night as one of the most prolific and earliest abduction stories to really ever come about. So
Yeah,
it's an incredible story.
that is
The
pretty
story
cool.
itself is amazing, but the base is a fascinating facility again because it's on top of this mountain, and to drive in there, it's a very desolate kind of wilderness, very tough getting out there. And the first time we went, we actually there was gate closures on the roads in the town leading up to it, so we had to hike. It was a 20-mile round trip hike to get back to and from the base. So, and that's when we did the film, our Strange Places episode about it. It's still one of my favorites, one of my favorite locations. So those are just a few. There's plenty more, but like the radar base, Bluff Creek, Alaska, those are definitely in my
So, like,
top 10.
let me ask you. So, do you get like, is it something that you have to get permission to do?
For which
Like,
part?
with the abandoned Air Force Base,
So that's something that it's a bit of a gray area, right? Because
right?
so it's
Exactly.
technically private
I
property,
enter
right?
that gray area a lot too. I'm just
Yeah.
asking your experience.
Absolutely. So it's technically private property, but the owners and the people who have owned it typically have allowed people in like foot traffic to go up there and go visit the spot. So but it's a mixed bag. You'll hear stories online of people saying, "Oh, I went there and I ran into some militia with guns and they chased me out of there."
Right.
It could just be people up there doing some kind of training or I don't know what, but
Yeah.
it's a decommissioned site, so it's been in private hands since the 60s. So it's not like it's under any kind of active military usage or anything like that. It's just a very interesting location, and I think just visually, it is one of the most interesting places in North America because of its prominence on the mountain. And yeah, so that's a situation we go in there and it's kind of like a bit of a gray area, right? Like where you got to be careful. You don't want to do anything too crazy, but as far as we have heard, it's okay to generally visit there, on foot and kind of check it out. So. Yeah, and unfortunately, a place like that, it gets a lot of vandalism and a lot of people that go there and just and the wrong kinds of people that go. They don't, like they're not like us. We go to appreciate the history and to just marvel at this, human engineering and imagine how brutal it was. And I read testimonies from some of the airmen that used to be stationed there, having to have giant tractors to clear all the snow going up the mountain in the brutal winter months in that part of Vermont. Just. We have a fascination and appreciation for the history. Fortunately, a lot of people just want to go and spray paint obscenities and vandals on these kind of locations, which is a shame. It really is.
Yeah, I like the word. Like, so I was just like I told you before we started. I was watching one of your episodes of Strange Places, and I liked the word that you used. It was desecration of these places,
yes.
and I thought it was spot on. I was like, huh. That's awesome. Like,
right.
Because there's some places in New York that are, just abandoned towns,
right.
and or whatever that I've gone to up in the Adirondacks, one of which is like historically significant. And the place that was there, it's the town of Adirondack. And that's where there's the McNaughton cabin, which is in that town. Which the town doesn't exist. It's totally been overgrown. Do you know where I'm talking about or not?
I don't know specifically, but I feel like I've heard stories.
So there's a cabin there, which has technically like been boarded up for years. And the place that own the people that own it, I guess they do their best, right, to keep it from getting, falling down, because it's what's called the McNaughton cabin. And that was where Teddy Roosevelt was staying
Oh wow.
the night that he found out about the assassination, and he was basically became president, right?
Wow.
Or that's the story, right?
Right. So it's
It
got
could
some
have been. It
historical
could have been something
significance.
a little different. I can't remember if did he become president because McKinley was assassinated, or was he the Secretary of the Navy then?
Yeah, I don't know that part of history enough to
Either
know,
way,
but
he found out that
he found out some big news there. Yeah.
yeah, and he was part of the cabinet at the minimum,
Right.
so he had to get back to D.C.
So it's got some historical significance. I mean,
Yeah, and
like you
that's where
said,
he was when it happened.
with like the
So
word desecration, like you wouldn't go to a museum and just start, or a
no,
historical site
right?
that's you got to pay to get into one of these places to like go look at some ancient ruins. You wouldn't go there and start spray painting stuff on it. So it's
Yeah,
these areas that are abandoned that are kind of left to the mercy of not only the elements but the vandals. And you have the people come in and try to scrap and steal stuff. But the worst is just the people that come in and just destroy, just for the sake of destroying. And it's
yeah,
mostly just younger kids and teenagers that do that. And look, we get it. Like kids, we all did stupid
right.
stuff when we were kids like that. You maybe don't appreciate the value of it. But a lot of places like this radar base, other locations, they're kind of informally maintained by groups of people that just kind of volunteer to go and clean it up. And the onslaught of the amount of destruction they just can't keep up with. So
No,
you see
right.
that at a lot of abandoned locations. But I find that the ones that are harder to get to tend to be more preserved. So like stuff in some of
Yeah,
these underground mines, finding some of this mining equipment is a little harder for people to get to, the general public. So
yeah,
that's
for
kind of
sure.
nice to see places that don't have
Yeah. Have
obscenities
you ever been to
everywhere.
Centralia?
I have, yeah. I've drove through there actually. There's not a lot to see anymore because they've kind of gotten rid of it. But we found a few ports where they had some of the steam coming out. We were there back in December. I was filming some stuff for Appalachian Bigfoot Files, and we happened to be just on our route. Like, oh, this is going to take us through Centralia. Let's go drive around, and the whole town is basically gone. But
Yeah.
there's a couple places in Pennsylvania where there's still underground mine fires,
Yes,
actually
correct.
still going, and around Scranton too. And then Scranton, the whole Wyoming Valley is filled with abandoned mines. We did a Strange Places on that. I've done some mine exploration on my own time
Yeah,
as well. It's very fascinating because this is like a total time capsule. It's unlike a historical site you might find like the radar base. Most of the stuff, the structures are there, but most of the equipment and everything has been scrapped or taken
right.
or destroyed over time. Whereas underground, I mean, everything is getting rusty because it's wet, but everything is left there. Like you'll find wrappers from small cakes and pastries that these miners were eating in the 1950s, and it's been
That's
sitting there
crazy.
now for
It's really
almost
cool.
100 years. We'll find these giant hoists that they somehow got into the mines, and we found um, cigarettes in there, even though you're not supposed to smoke in the mines, but the miners did it anyway. You find old boots, gloves, equipment. I mean, it's incredible how much is still left. And again, it's preserved because it's kind of in this underground state where it's not constant elements. Like there's just moisture, but that's about it. So
Yeah,
it's like a total time capsule in some of these mines.
yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I have a friend that lives down there that I do research with who is convinced that the mines around their house, there's some on
I wouldn't be
not on their
surprised.
property, but a little bit,
Oh,
back off. That
they're everywhere.
she
They're
thinks that
everywhere.
there's a population of Sasquatch that live in the mines.
Oh, interesting. Wow, I did not know that. I've heard, theories of that, but I've never really. I
Yeah,
could see maybe opportunistically using some of these mines. Like I've got.
because some of I guess there's one of the mines where there's still the active fire is not far from it. And so
That, yeah.
it's actually warmer even than the 55 degrees that normally they maintain,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that things are a little drier, things are, just more hospitable. And in
Interesting.
the winter, so this is her theory. And,
Yeah. I could see. I
maybe
mean,
we'll find out, but
who knows? Yeah, I know. I've got a friend down there that he was in the Strange Places episode. His channel is Anthracite Horror Stories. He does a lot of videos about mines and some of the disasters, and he does a lot of he's taken us into some of these mines, and he actually cooked a steak on one of these mine fires, one of these ports where the steam was coming out. He wrapped it in tinfoil and actually cooked a steak on there, kind of as a joke.
wow.
But yeah, and actually when we were there too, one of the episodes I did of the Appalachian Bigfoot Files was about the Suskin Screamer. So it was about the northeast part of Pennsylvania, and right outside of Scranton, you have Suskin, which is this wooded area, and there's been a lot of Bigfoot sightings. And there's a story from the early 1900s or late 1800s of this watchman in a fire tower who saw this weird looking bear with
yeah, I've heard that.
Burnt bear running, screaming, and that's kind of the Suskin Screamer story. And so there's Bigfoot stories around that area because once you get out of town, you're up in these little mountains and hills, plenty of habitat and space. And
oh yeah,
my friend
sure.
Matt Arner, he's a police officer in Pennsylvania.
I know Matt.
Yeah. Matt, he's with the Sasquatch Experience crew, and he's taken a lot of reports from that Poconos area, that Northeast PA. So we filmed with him out there, and he was like, this is where I had a guy I knew who was building a cabin, and he had an encounter. And 30 years before that, there was two kayakers who had an encounter in the same spot. And there's like a cyclical pattern along the Appalachian Trail with some of that stuff. So, and then it leads right into Northeast New Jersey, where you have, High Point State Park and the legend of the red eye creature and all the other stuff. And it's kind of one contiguous habitat.
Absolutely. So, Matt was on the first expedition I ever went on.
Cool. Yeah.
He's a real good dude.
We've been out with him too, to one of their research areas. Him and Sean Fork are out in, the Allegheny kind of plateau area, which is right before you get towards like the Allegheny National Forest.
Which is my favorite research space.
There's so much stuff out there. There's nothing. I mean, we actually came across in that Strange Places episode. We were filming with Matt and them, in kind of an area they research for Bigfoot. And on our way out, there's an abandoned paper mill and a dam there in Austin, PA that had collapsed, and it was wreaked havoc. And there's you find this giant dam, and down the street there's an abandoned paper mill that we went and explored, and we actually put him in that Pennsylvania Strange Places episode. So it was cool. We went Bigfooting and then kind of urban exploration right in the same area.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I was literally just there this weekend. Did some filming over by the dam and some places where we've had experiences. So
there's a lot of stuff up there. I know Matt and these guys said in the fall they found a track or some kind of potential track out there. I remember he had sent me that, and there's still plenty of activity, and a lot of the reports they get out there is like hunters and people who have hunting camps up in the mountains, and not typically the people that are trying to get any attention talking about Bigfoot, and they're just there to hunt. And there's elk. We ran into tons of elk out there.
Yep.
Which is something that I think surprises a lot of people.
Bizarre. Eastern.
Yeah, it's cool because they're huge. Elk
they're monstrous.
And you hear that elk bugle. I mean, I've heard that out west plenty of times in Arizona and other places out in the mountains. But hearing it on the East Coast is really cool too.
Yeah, you bring up Alaska as well, and I had a Bigfoot encounter in Alaska. That was
wow.
I say by Anchorage, but that's relative.
Because once you're like 10 minutes outside Anchorage, you're in the middle of nowhere.
Right. And so it's like 2 hours outside of Anchorage, but like I said, it's all kind of relative because where
was it?
Down in the national forest. That's right there. Like what is it? The Chugach. Yeah, that's it.
Chugach. I don't know.
We were doing some operations, and this when I was in the Marine Corps. So we were doing some operations there, and we did a lot of drug interdiction stuff. Not just there, but people don't realize that people grow a lot of weed in the summer in the national forest.
A short season, you gotta take advantage of it.
But so there, and then like in California.
I know up in the Bluff Creek region, Bobo has stories about growers encountering stuff.
We were actually down farther south by Santa Barbara. In the Los Padres National Forest, and there stuff happened there too.
Tell stuff. I've heard a lot of crazy stories. Yeah,
that's more like you're getting into what you would call a Yucca Man region down there. It's pretty arid, lots of rocks, not a lot of trees to hide around and whatnot. But either way, But so, do you have any personal experiences? Like, let's just say with Sasquatch.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've never had a sighting or anything that I can say is 100%. But
like Class A, you've never had like a Class A sighting,
no,
right?
I wish. I've just had a handful of experiences that are weird that I could never say are 100% Sasquatch.
Right.
But they kind of fit perhaps the purported behavior. So like the wood knocking stuff, the rock throwing, the whoops, the kind of vocalizations. And again, I'm not going to claim it's Sasquatch. Definitely, but Yeah, a few times I've had some stuff happen, like at Bluff Creek, we experienced a whoop. I think I was mentioning it earlier, but a buddy of mine, his dog, we were out in this place called Louse Camp, which is kind of the main camp that was set up in the 1950s by Tom Slick expedition there at Bluff Creek. Really, when the word Bigfoot hit the news and was just becoming known. And that camp since then has been, host of quite a few experiences. Bobo had a sighting there. Other people I know have had encounters around Louse Camp, and this was 2021, and we were out there, and we had a group of people, and we were going to see the road where the original Bigfoot tracks were found in the 50s that gave way to the name Bigfoot. And the logging crews were out there, and these guys were saying they were hearing something kind of moving around in the brush and like some possible knocks and stuff, and we were like, okay, whatever, we're just going to see the tracks, or going to see where the tracks were found. Obviously 50s, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's like a historical site. Like, it's cool to see it. And my buddy's dog started acting really weird. And this is a dog that, had hiked the whole Appalachian Trail and around animals, like never has to be leashed, very good temperament. It's like some kind of Australian shepherd mix or something. And the dog started tail between the legs and started trying to duck to the side of the trail. I guess that was his MO when he got scared or frightened. And, tail between the legs shaking. I've never seen a dog look that way. Like when they say tail between the legs,
terrified.
like that, you understand that expression fully when you look at it. And we actually had to take a belt from my buddy Jonathan and make a leash just to get him back to camp. He just was trying to hide. It was weird. And these guys were saying they were hearing stuff. So we're like, okay, whatever. Bear, but he's like, no, he's been around bears before. You run through the kind of logical explanations. And then while we're at camp, there was a group of people around the fire. And this was maybe like less than an hour after the kind of incident on the road. But, we'd hiked back to camp then. And where my buddy's car was, the dog was there and he was fine. He was now wagging his tail. And I happened to be filming, and I walked over to him, and I'm just like, oh, how you doing? You okay? And all of a sudden I just hear this kind of like whoop sound from like the hill right around. And I'm like, okay, who did the whoop? And Ken Gearhart was in camp there too. And for whatever reason, I was like, was that Ken doing a whoop? And there's a couple people standing maybe 10 feet from me. And I start asking them, did you guys hear that whoop? They're like, what whoop? I didn't hear anything. They didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And I went to everybody in camp, and everyone was accounted for. There's only one other dog in camp, didn't make that noise. So either there was somebody hiding in the woods around us making this noise. I don't know. I mean, I had some people listen to the audio.
Yeah, definitely weird, right?
They said it sounded, not like an owl or anything like that. So again, that's one of those things I can't say is definitive. It was weird. It was just like, I heard the whoop, the camera picked it up, and the dog heard it. Nobody else in camp heard it or has recording of it or anything like that. And everyone else was around a fire where they were chatting. So one of those things that's easy to miss, but I heard it and the camera captured it, and we have a pretty good recording of it. So, if anyone wants to listen to it, they can get in that episode. And Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, it's there towards the end. It's like, we present our findings and just allow it to, here it is. You will. Like, we're not claiming one thing or another. So that was an interesting one, but probably some of the more interesting stuff was up in Alaska, up at Area A, place I was talking about earlier. We had a couple instances there where you'd hear like these mystery gunshots, and there's like nobody around. I mean, somebody's there because you can only get in by plane or boat. We're the only boat in there. So there's nobody else around, and like nobody 7 bays away, 20 miles away, you're not going to hear them shooting a gun,
No, right.
Across a mountain range where there's a small community, like you're not going to hear that. So we'd hear these mystery gunshots. And one night we were sitting around the fire at 3, 4 a.m. A couple of us just kind of shooting the shit. And all of a sudden, like we hear this kind of like what sounds like a wood knock kind of just like start breaking the silence. And we're like, oh, shh. And then it sounds like rocks are being thrown or something is being thrown from the top of this hill and sort of hitting stuff along the way. And before it hits the water, the ocean, it would hit this rock beach that was there, like hit that and then splash. So it's not like, because we would hear seals and sea lions splashing in the bay at night.
Yeah.
But you can hear it. And then you take the thermal over there and you can see a little red signature jump in and out of the water. So that sound we knew, but this was like you could distinctly hear stuff being hit along the way and then hitting the rock beach before splashing. And we tried, we emulated that, but there's almost no rocks to find around there because the entire ground is covered in this moss. You have to actually go down to the beach to get
Yeah.
rocks. But we would try, throw them, just throw it in the water. Okay, that just sounds like a seal. Now try hitting as much stuff as you can while throwing down there, and then hit the rock beach and then splash. Like, yeah, that's what it sounds like. The hill, you try to roll. We tried rolling rocks down the hill just to see, okay, maybe like
Maybe they got like
a
dislodged.
rock. Yeah, the rock goes 3 feet and gets caught up on moss and debris, and you don't even hear it move because that environment, you can lay down. It's so comfortable. You can lay down in this spongy moss and just lay there, and it absorbs you, and then you get back up, and it like pops back up.
Yeah.
It's spongy, mossy,
Like the original
rainforest.
What do they call those? The memory foam mattresses, right?
Foam. I've taken naps up in those woods. A bunch of us just laying there in that moss. So yeah, there's not like a lot of places where that sound would have been naturally emanating from. So we don't know what to make of that. I mean,
Yeah.
is a bear throwing rocks? Like it doesn't make sense. And we had the little hill above us, and we would scan with the thermals. So we had that happen. On that same trip, we found this really weird looking handprint on the back of the cabin on the metal siding, and we actually got our friend Larry Beans Baxter, former police officer, retired, and he tried to lift the print, as they would forensically, and then he also swab samples of each of the kind of fingers, and that was sent off to Doug Hychek for Legend Meets Science 2. And
Doug.
That's in the testing for the for Legend Meets Science 2. So we don't know the results yet, but it's cool knowing people like Larry and others that have kind of that professional skill set that they bring to the investigation, because I'm not trained in science or evidence collection, right? Like I do my best as an amateur citizen scientist, but if I know somebody who's got that skill set, like, hey man, I want you to how would you collect this evidence, like if you were doing this for a crime scene? And
absolutely.
Cool. So that first trip was pretty exciting. We had some of that weird stuff happen. And a second trip out to Area A in 2023, spent 2 weeks out there and almost nothing happened. Super quiet. It was raining the whole time. It was just a total different vibe. Like there just wasn't anything strange going on. So it's not like every time we go out there, we have something happen. Far from it. There's been times where we've spent a lot of time and resources to get to a place, and then nothing happens. And I think that's the reality. It's not like what you see on TV where every time the camera's on, oh my God, there's something crazy going on, or got a thermal video. Like that is a very minuscule percentage of the time. But the time something interesting does happen is when you can kind of say, okay, this is enough to keep me going, keep me interested, right?
Yeah.
So again, all those experiences I can't say are definitively Sasquatch, but they are interesting, and I think they fit into possible behavior. I can't say 100%.
People ask me why I do this stuff, or like why people do it. And I said, my biggest way to describe it is do you play golf? And most people will be like, well, I have. And I go, so what kept you playing golf? And literally it was like, well, that one drive I had, that entire 18 holes, that one drive that was just like needle straight, and it was awesome. And the feeling I got, I said, same.
That's it. You hear that?
I heard
crisp wood knock, and it's like, okay.
And you're like, nothing else is doing that. At least in certain, at least that's what you tell yourself.
If you can rule out the other possibilities, it's hard to debate,
Or like if you hear that whoop or that scream or that yell, that can be nothing other than, you're just like, well,
it's like a validation a little bit, and it's enough to it's not definitive proof of anything, right? But it's enough to keep you interested. Like we had recently while we were in West Virginia, we had a few nights, or we do overnight audio recording, and we heard these pretty interesting knocks at this one location. They were very crisp and clear. Okay, could it be a tree doing something? Sure, but it sounds so distinct. And then upon reviewing video, I found there was a clip where I'm setting up a saddle tree stand that I would be using later on for with a thermal at night. This weird scream that I captured on audio that none of us heard in the moment. Like none of us noticed this, but the camera captured it. And there's like a weird, like a yell up in the mountain. And it's like, there was nobody else around that we're aware of. So either there's somebody out there screaming for whatever reason, or, it didn't sound, we were able to rule out some of the other critters. It didn't really sound like anything else, but can I say it's a Sasquatch? No, obviously not.
Yeah, the one, that expedition that we were on with Matt, or that Matt was on, if I'm not mistaken, I know it was there was another gentleman that it was him and Matt were back at base camp, and they heard samurai chatter.
Interesting.
So
where was that expedition?
In Allegheny.
Oh, in Allegheny. Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Matt that was there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was, and yeah, kind of crazy. Cool. It's just those little things, though.
He got a recording out there with his group, Catskill Appalachian Research Collective. They
who is it?
Mike Lucci. You know Mike
I know.
Lucci?
I don't know Mike, but so I do a podcast on Kark as well. Okay. So we do a podcast.
Yeah, I know because they've got a bunch of stuff going on. But he does the Bigfoot Journal now over on Untold Radio. But he's become a good buddy of mine, and we do a lot of research together. Like he was in West Virginia with us on this trip, and
so
he has some cool recordings from the Alleghenies that are like these howls you can hear in the distance.
Yeah, that's a small world. So I don't know Mike, but I know friends of his that like because Kark, you know, I mean, it's still around, and it's still a channel, and there's still people doing stuff on there. But I'm one of the podcasts on there now, so cool. It's another podcast called Whispers of the Wood Ape.
Oh, nice! I like that name.
That me and another guy do. So. Yeah, so one of my research partners, Gwen Purcell. I don't know if you've ever met her.
I have not met her, but I know she's friends with Mike and Matt and a bunch of people. Yeah, she's
they're opening a store.
That's right. I think I heard something about that.
So that's kind of fun. We're gonna see how that goes. But,
that's interesting. Yeah. Hey.
Yeah.
If it works. It works, right? Why not?
In the Susquehanna Mall.
Gives us a place to visit on our drives through.
Yeah, and she runs the Central Pennsylvania Cryptid Conference Festival. I should know this, right?
It's tough. There's a lot of events nowadays. It's hard to know the names.
So that's at the mall this year as well.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, Pennsylvania, man, like we said, it's a great place. There's a lot of cool stuff going on.
I just interviewed Scott Tompkins. Have you ever met him? He's the Bigfoot mapping project guy.
Yep. Yeah.
And he states, his data states that he gets more sightings from Pennsylvania than any other state.
I could see that because one thing I've always noticed over the years, like typically even in like 20 years ago when people thought, oh, Bigfoot on the East Coast, no way. But you had stories out of which two states mostly? Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Yep.
Why is that? They're both states that are pretty high population, but also have a lot of rural areas.
Yeah.
Whereas like West Virginia, which I think is probably much better habitat, it's barely over 1 million people. And it's so hard to get around in those hills and hollers. So Pennsylvania, what do you have? You have Pittsburgh on one side and Philly on the other.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is rural. And it also has, I believe, I know this was the stat like 5-6 years ago. I don't know if it still is, the highest amount of registered hunters in the U.S., like the most amount of people going hunting. So it makes sense. A lot of the stories from PA over the years, you hear from hunters and but Scott, he would know. He gets a lot of that raw data. He's created some maps for us, and I've actually done a video with him too down in Louisiana where we went out kayaking together into the Atchafalaya Basin and did a little overnight investigation. And Scott's awesome.
He has a great
book now too, and I got to do a review for them on that. That was really cool. Bigfoot kids book. Yeah, he
has a great encounter on his hunting lease.
Yep. Yeah. I remember I had him on my live stream a few years ago, kind of right after that happened, and he talked about it. And but he does some great work. But he's also really good in the woods. Like when I went out with him in Louisiana, he's really into a lot of like this down there. A lot of the creatures are smaller. Right? You're dealing with reptiles and snakes and all this kind of stuff. Aquatic creatures. Whereas up where I'm at here in the Northeast, moose and bear. And that's what I'm kind of more looking out for. But he'd like pull a snake, and he's like, "Oh, here's a rat snake," or "Oh, you see those crawfish right there in that little." It's like not a nest, but a crawfish, kind of where they grow and raise in the water. All these little things you gain an appreciation. He saw cottonmouth. And we were wading through the swamp. He's like, "Oh, you see that cottonmouth right there?" And you see this little white thing in the water. So they raise their mouth open like this, hoping that you'll step on it, and then that's how they kind of show that they're a threat.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. But yeah, he's great in the woods, and he does a good job with the Bigfoot mapping project.
For sure.
Promoting that. And
I get a lot of info from there. A lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I've
such
done
a good
videos
resource.
in the past too, where I did like an audio video a video about audio encounters and alleged audio, and I asked him, "Hey, can you pool sightings you have in the database? Because he aggregates stuff from the BFRO and
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere. Can you get me all Class A reportings of sightings that include a wood knock?" And he sent me he's like, okay, and then he's got a way to put it all together. He's a GIS data guy, so he knows what he's doing.
Yep.
And it was like 26 or 27 reports across North America in which there was a Class A sighting, and a wood knock was either heard before or after the encounter, or actually a creature seen physically doing it. Because I got tired of people saying, "Oh, wood knocks. How do we even know they're related to Bigfoot?" I'm like, okay, well, if we can trust any of the eyewitness data, we should be able to look at kind of statistically very, very rare. But again, there was a lot of sightings where people just hear a knock beforehand, and then they'll actually see a creature. Or there's a couple where it was afterwards they heard a knock. Or there was one in Florida where the guy thought it was somebody with a ghillie suit beating a tree with a stick, making this knocking noise. And he's approached it. It was like a primate-looking creature that ran off on two legs. So there is this stuff, and I told Scott, "Hey man, just give me this list, and I'd love to put that in the video, and just discuss it, talk about some theories about the wood knock stuff." So
Yeah. So have you ever talked to Terrestrial at Sasquatch Data Project?
I don't believe so. No.
I'll put you in touch with her. She's like a data wizard too.
Sasquatch Data Project. I feel like I've heard of that though.
Yeah, no, she's got a lot. I mean, she doesn't have as big a data pull as Scott does, but I think they're hopefully going to get worked up together. And she's got some. You should look her up. Just saying.
Yeah,
Sasquatch
there's a lot
data.
of good people doing some good data work.
Oh yeah, and this data work is great because I've always had like what's the color dispersion? What's the what's the because the one thing that's interesting to me is this whole flesh and bone versus woo-woo-y kind of stuff. Right. And like one of the things that I've always is like some people will report red eyes.
Yep, the red eye creature, right? New Jersey.
Right. So what's that about? Like, and what percentage of, and where are they?
Yeah. I've heard reports of it, self-illuminated and also just
yes,
lights,
correct.
Kind of like the tapetum lucidum.
Which is confusing.
That is weird. I know people on both sides. I know people that say, well, the red eye stuff, it clearly shows that means Bigfoot is not a normal creature. It has abilities that are not normal. And then on the other hand, people are like, well, I think it maybe they have like a special way to illuminate. So and actually what's interesting too, and then in British Columbia, a lot of people will sometimes talk about not necessarily red eye, but I've heard people talk about like white light that they're seeing from some of the eyes. And in British Columbia, one of the tribes I visited up there, the New Hawk Nation, have been there for tens of thousands of years. They have like Bigfoot-like creatures in their folklore. They say that when the eyes look upon you, they have a power to freeze you because they have crystals in their eyes, and that's what causes you to become paralyzed in fear. And that's like when people talk about like zapped, or maybe just like I've talked to witnesses who this thing looked at them and they're like time slowed down, it froze. Maybe that's just our fear response.
Yeah,
it's interesting because the natives they're interpreting that in their own way, and they're saying it's the crystals. This thing has an ability to do that. So
yeah.
With the eye stuff, it's interesting, but like I said, there's so many people doing good data work. Scott, there's also this guy Wes, who runs an account called Squatcher Metrics.
Okay,
he does a lot of analysis posts. Lucci, actually, Mike does a lot of really great data dives for his Bigfoot journal. I was like shouting him out because he does, even for my videos, I'll be like, hey dude, what do you think about like winter sightings? Tell me about some of the stats, and he'll go in this he's a data guy too. So there's a bunch of people doing good stuff like that. And I got to respect it because I'm not a numbers guy.
Yeah, so nor am I.
So I'm like, I love being able to talk
the
to
data,
people about
but I don't like to come up with the data.
But I'm not like a numbers nerd. So I love talking to somebody like a Scott or a Mike or somebody that has that kind of know-how. And it's really
absolutely
cool to take that data and make something out of it.
So I would love to continue doing this, but just to kind of start wrapping things up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Broadcasting Seeds, that's the name of this podcast. I like to give the guests the opportunity to plant their own seeds in the audience's mind.
Love it.
What do you think? What's a seed that you could plant?
Oh, that's, a seed I'll plant is, how about this? You know, we do all this crazy stuff. We go all these crazy places, but like creating your own adventures is really not that difficult. I get a lot of people that reach out to me like, do you do paid expeditions? I want to join you on these kinds of things. And I'm like, I don't want to get paid to show people the woods and have a good time. I think it's, the world is nowadays, what's crazy about the world is, everything is so, we're tech all the time. AI is everywhere. It's taking over everything. Like people are losing that connection with nature that even our ancestors maybe had 100 years ago. 150 years ago, 90% of the population lived so much closer to the land than we do today. And I think we've lost that connection. So I think that's why a lot of people want nature as kind of that out, but it's really not that hard. Unless you live in like the middle of New York City, you might have to drive a little further, but other places you can get out there and do your own adventures. And it's really not that difficult. You don't take it from me. Just do your own research, go out there, have fun with it. I think having fun with it is the most important thing. If you're not enjoying it, it's probably not fun. And believe me, even the times where you spend a week in West Virginia and it rains like 90% of the time, like it did for us recently, which is miserable in the moment. But later on, you don't really remember that stuff. You just remember the fun, positive elements of it. And, anyone can go out and do this type of research. I would implore people, try to do some sort of scientific methodology, as in just like basic data recording. So write down, the basic data, or nowadays with phones and stuff, you can really make sure you write down your location. It has all that metadata, weather patterns. And if you have something weird happen, document it, right? Film it. One of the things I really like to plant is get a 3D scanning app. So like Scaniverse.
Scaniverse is awesome. Yeah.
Scaniverse is great. Everyone's got iPhones now, and you can go in and, get a 3D scan of a footprint like this one that I got in Alaska, where you can see like, there's details. And what's so cool is my friend in Washington can send me his 3D scan of a print he got, and I can look at it for myself. So get your normal pictures. Like if you come across a track or a cool find or really anything you find interesting, use the technology we have at our hands. Like, yes, tech can be bad and, there's a lot of negative consequences, but we have abilities that 10 years ago people wouldn't have imagined.
Yeah.
You have to carry plaster. And now, let's say you find a footprint, data collection, 3D scan it, get your pictures with a scale item, pack a dollar bill. If you can't have a tape measure, a dollar bill is a uniform item you can put next to the tracks.
Yeah.
Don't use your hand or a shoe because that's not universal. So do that. So you now have two pieces of evidence. You've got a 3D scan, your photos, your video, and then if you get a plaster cast, so you're getting like multiple pieces of evidence out of one kind of like data collection trip. So it might not prove Bigfoot, but it's something that you can then pass off to somebody maybe that could use that data and say, here's all my info, and they have a way to look at it and verify, okay, this happened here and then, and do your best, do your due diligence to document this stuff, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's a cool experience to find something like that on your own, and
absolutely,
and just make sure you document it properly. And
yeah,
and again, I think that the seed I'll plant again is that one about just get out there and have fun, go on an adventure. It doesn't have to be super serious, and if you're physically able to, go out to some cool places and just be smart, be safe about it. But the world is, it's too short to live in this like constant fear or anger. You really got to get out there and appreciate some of these incredible places that could be right in your backyard.
Absolutely. So tell us where we can find you one last time.
Yeah, so most of my work is on Small Town Monsters. You can look us up on YouTube or website. I've also got a channel called Alex Petakov Adventures. That's where I do a little bit more different kind of videos. I do some reviews and stuff because I use a lot of different gear and different sort of videos than perhaps some of my Small Town Monster stuff. And you can find a lot of that at petakovmedia.com. That's PETAKOV media.com. And I say that because it has links to everything. It'll be links to all the STM stuff I do, all the other series, everything you want to, appearances, stuff I'm going to be doing, podcasts, whatever. So it's all written there. This will be linked on there as well at some point. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on, for coming on.
Yes,
for sure.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely, man. We'll do it again. We'll talk about Yugoslavia. All right, man.
Yeah, I got bad thoughts that make my mind scared. Hold me hostage and they don't fight fair. Who gon' pray for me and wipe on my tears? Who gon' save me if you not right here? Move this darkness and make my sight clear. Take me away cause I don't like here. Ghosts of my past, they feeling the night air. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Drowning, I'm off the deep end. Apparitions of all my demons. All my thoughts are committing treason. All alone, who gon' hear me screaming? Manifestations of my fears. Regrets that stretched out for light years. Can almost touch the light, homie, it's right there. Body free but trapped in my nightmares. Wake me up, don't let me drown. All the lights are fading now. All my life is fading now. All my life is fading now. Wake me up, don't let me drown. All my life is fading now. All my life is fading now. Body free but trapped in my nightmares.